Hi, welcome to the Bottle Talk, and in specific to one of the newest episodes of our Winemaker series. Today we have a very special guest, Stephen Weber from Montinore Estate. We'll talk with him about his winemaking journey, what led him to Willamette Valley. We discuss why this area is so special for viticulture and for winemaking. We also talk about everything from climate change, biodynamic and organic viticulture, all the way to why he uses whole cluster and stem inclusions in some of his ferments. Stephen also has an interesting Gewürz story, but I'm going to let him tell you about that. So without further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Stephen Weber. All right, so we'll start out, Stephen, a little bit about your background. One of the things that we like to do is, like I said, bridge that gap between producer and end consumer. And I think part of that process is sort of knowing what your history is and what you got through to get you where you are today. And we'll talk a little bit more about some personal notes later, but obviously you've made wine in many different parts of the area, Australia and Alsace. Can you talk to us about where did it all start? How did you get involved in making wine? When were you bitten by the bug? And talk about your journey of some of those jumps that you made all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis. I mean, I think like a lot of people who get into wine, they don't necessarily intend to do that. It's not the first and foremost thing. So, in actual fact, I started off in the wine industry in 1989 in wine retailing, and as what you call a trainee retail manager in a wine specialist in the UK. And I started to enjoy it very much, and I love the whole, particularly like the far-flung places that are selling wines from Australia and New Zealand and some from the US. And it's just like, to me, that was like, whoa, these wines have come from, 10, 11,000 miles away. And I started to get obviously more knowledgeable and started to do education. And that started the whole kind of ball rolling with my initial kind of baseline into wine. And at the same time, I started doing study through the Wine and Spirit Education Trust in the UK. And that culminated in my diploma, which I succeeded in achieving in 1996. And at that
Congratulations, by the way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, now I'm 26 years or something, almost. I've probably forgotten most of the stuff actually. But at that point, it was like, well, where do I go from here? Because actually, I just stepped out of retailing at that point, and but I love travel. So then I started traveling, and I quickly learned that from 1997 onwards, that you could do 2 vintages in a year, both Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere. Incorporating travel, meeting great people, tasting good wines, eating great food. And so then for my age, I just carried on doing that for nearly 5 years, which was a little exhausting, I'll be honest. but it was an amazing experience. And that's where I just really started to think, like, this is what I want to do as a career. I want to be in the cellar, I want to be around vineyards, I want to be in wine. And so that's kind of the way it's kind of rolled on, with including, like you say, vintage in Alsace. And eventually taking a permanent position down here at Montinore in 2006, assistant winemaker at the time and now winemaker. And, it's like many things to say. If you stay somewhere long enough, you eventually kind of, meander to the top. So in 2016, I've been here 10 years and that's when I got offered the position of head winemaker, and I'm still here now. So I must be doing something right, but probably not everything. So.
Absolutely. I just think I think it must have brought a wonderful level of learning and complexity, because obviously, a philosophy in Alsace and a philosophy in the sunburnt country of Australia are very different ways of approaching not only viticulture, but winemaking. So obviously you were able to have a good background and exposure to different elements that you could bring with you.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that's been really valuable experience. But I think it's kind of a tale of, or 2 parts really, because when I was in Australia and somewhat New Zealand, like I kind of more Australia with the climate particularly, I fell in love with those varietals down there, the Syrah and the Cabernets and so on, and the Merlots. And I love the environment and the lifestyle there. But it was really when I started coming to Oregon and then subsequently Alsace that cool climates or cooler climates and kind of niche areas started to kind of really engage me. And the varietals that are grown in Alsace and likewise for a large part in Oregon, and then obviously the link to Burgundy kind of garners a lot more heartfelt interest to me. There's so much to learn about Pinot and so much to learn about some of the aromatic varietals, perhaps a bit more for me anyway, than the Cabernets and the Merlots and the Shirazes. So that's when I just started to think that these are the kind of areas that I want to kind of hone myself in on, and Oregon started to be that area.
Absolutely. I do want to touch on that that later, because I find those the subtle nuances in some of those aromatic varieties, not the ones that smack you over the head, but they're a little more elegant and interesting. You're gonna laugh when I tell you this, but sometimes some of the Pinot Noirs that are heavy and over extracted, you know, I find them not very Pinot Noir-esque. And I think one of the some of the white varietals that you do and the Pinot Noir, I find that they're more like a burlesque show than a striptease, if that makes sense. There's a hint of elegance there, I guess, is the take-home message. But okay, so you traveled all over the world, made wine all over the world, got a learning experience. You found yourself now in Oregon, in Willamette. So, and one of the questions that I posed to you was, what makes Oregon so special, and in particular, what makes Willamette so special? I think, and let me preface your answer by saying that I think a lot of people see wine regions on a bottle or on a map, and they think, oh, okay, that's a chunk of dirt in that area. What makes it different or special? But in some of the answers, and I don't want to steal your thunder, that you talked about, not only the incredible variety of terroir that I don't think people appreciate for Willamette Valley with the soil and things like that, but the vintage variation as well. So if you could touch on some of those.
Yeah, I mean, I think we use the term marginal climate in Oregon. It's maybe even overused a little bit, but I think the Willamette Valley really details that the marginal climate note very well. I mean, for those who don't know, the Willamette Valley is, it's about sort of 200 miles long by about 70 miles wide. Montinore is actually at the northern tip of that valley. And as you touched on there, Dennis, the variety in topography, soil, and even microclimates, and kind of channels where the wind comes in from the coast and stuff like that, really does lend to so many varied sites where you can grow amazing grapes. And thankfully, grapes like Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, etc., cooler climate Chardonnays do so well with these niche sites, and they're not all over. I think that's one of the things. One of the other questions you posed was, some of the challenges about growing grapes in the Willamette Valley, and it's not like there's amazing sites all over. There are amazing sites, but they've got to be found and they've got to be worked and they've got to be accessed. And so yes, we've got variation in topography, and we've got, but you can't grow grapes too high and you can't grow them too low, so to speak. So, and there's only a limitation on those sites on the in-between bits. So it's marginal in climate, it's marginal in site selection. The soils are truly amazing. There's so much variety of soils, and what the soils, their history and what they're going to generate to the fruit that's grown off them, and the style of the fruit, and even perhaps of the marginal earliness of the ripening or the lateness of the ripening is truly terrific. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the Willamette Valley. It's definitely kind of on the cusp. Now, I'm just going to counter that somewhat, be a little bit devil's advocate by climate change. It really is real. And I talk about cool climate, I talk about marginal climate and marginal site. But, things have changed in the last 6 years. I can't deny that the last 6 years, 7 years almost in the Willamette Valley have been pretty warm. And that wasn't always the case. When I first came to Oregon in 97, 97, 98, 99 were just very different vintages. And that's kind of the way Oregon was really up until the late, 2009, 2010, and then things have started to change since then. So whether we're going to keep talking about marginal climate and how that's going to affect the other varieties that maybe could come in, and some varieties that may not do so well in the warmer climate and warmer sites, or maybe people are going to start to search for higher elevation sites that perhaps were too cool before, but now are not so cool. That's going to become an interesting topic. However, there's only, this limitation on land, limitation on availability of sites, and of course money to develop all that going forward. So yeah, lots to talk about. That's a down the rabbit hole.
It really is, and some of the things that you touched on, I've talked with other winemakers all over the world, and that seems to be a continued theme throughout, with the not only of looking at new sites, higher sites, cooler sites that potentially could continue growing the same varietals they're growing, but also experimenting with other varietals that ordinarily perhaps 20, 30 years ago wouldn't have grown there, which kind of leads us into, I think it's very interesting because everyone associates Willamette Valley in Oregon with some of the Burgundian varietals, right? But on top of that, some Alsatian and some Northern Italian varietals, even Northern Italian reds. And talk about why they do well. Why does Pinot Noir and Chardonnay do well there, and why do the Alsatian whites and the Northern Italian wines do well in Willamette?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Pinot Noir is just so suited. I think we're on a similar kind of latitude to Burgundy, almost the same actually, the 45th parallel. So again, it's still very marginal, and Pinot Noir kind of likes a bit of that. It likes a bit of the challenge. It's challenging to grow. It's challenging to ripen sometimes, but it just does well with that. I think the sort of level of aspect, the variation, or the temperature, it's not too hot, it's not too cold, generally speaking. Pinot Noir just kind of thrives on that, but you've got to be careful because there's some things that can be a challenge in the growing season to Pinot, particularly. The warmth that hopefully we get in the summer definitely garners well to like getting a riper style of Pinot Gris and some with the Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer does really well, for example, I found on just a generously warm summer year where the flavors can really develop in the fruit. So yeah, there's those varieties do really well. We touch on the Northern Italian varietals. We actually grow at Montinore too, Lagrein and Terroir. We've just got a little bit on site. It's like about a couple of acres of each. That's really interesting because we planted those 10 years ago, and generally they've struggled. And they struggle because we haven't really had the heat at harvest time or coming into harvest time and through harvest time to really get those right. However, again, last 2 years, that's changing. And for the last 2 years, we've actually had ripe Lagrein and ripe Terroir. So I wouldn't say those varietals are, the Northern Italian ones are completely like a shoe-in to this area, but they're coming, and therefore other things can come as well into the valley. But I think just going back to the general, the variety of grapes we can grow to get lovely flavors, different flavors to perhaps a very warm climate, or what you might get if you grow Gris or Chardonnay in a warm climate, or Pinot for that matter. You definitely get more kind of nuanced flavors, more kind of balance, nerviness, almost tension, and I think that does really well for those. And it's got to be one of the best grape growing regions in the world, I think, for those reasons. So.
And one of the things that I wanted to touch on, because I find this very important, and winemakers and especially your passion with it says a lot, because, and I don't want to misquote you, but so I have it here about the biodynamic and organic. Biodynamic and organic have become marketing terms where a lot of people push it out there to sell that, but I don't think the end consumer has a firm grasp or understanding. A lot of consumers aren't grabbing Rudolf Steiner and reading his book, let me say that, but I think it's so important. And one of the things that you talked about was the characteristics produce fruit with more layers of interest, being, as it were, better built or better stuff. And I think that's so true, that if you have that that attachment to the land and taking care of the land, and that means putting good stuff back in it, revitalizing the soil. And if you do that, the stuff you put in that soil, you're going to see the difference in that. But can you talk about, because obviously you're very passionate about the organic and biodynamic, can you talk about why you feel that produces better grapes and better wine? And then one of the things that you touched on with some of the questions was how it does handcuff you a little bit when you have some of those problems like the powdery mildew that you touched on, and how that does make it more of a challenge to stay true to those biodynamic and organic beliefs.
Yeah, it's great, Dennis. Thanks for kind of filling out there about biodynamic and organic for our viewers. First, I just have to say that I think anybody who's practicing any kind of organic or biodynamic viticulture, kudos to them. That's great. Just talk about stewardship there. We've been doing this in earnest for 16, going on 17 years now at Montinore. I just want to say different. So I think it's fairly key that there's a lot of people, as I great on them, that they're practicing organic viticulture and biodynamic, and somewhat biodynamic viticulture, And that's good, but that's one thing to be practicing, another thing to go through the whole certification process. And Montinore goes through the whole certification process. And I understand why people don't want to do that. Like growers don't want to do that, and winemakers, because it's an awful lot of work. It's a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of paperwork, inspections and so on. So that's part of what we've elected to do, along with others in the Willamette Valley, a growing number actually. And I think that's really good. It's really good all round, but like I say, a lot of work to be certified. We found at Montinore the application of only doing organic and biodynamic viticulture definitely being an overall health, a picture of health in the vineyard. There's a vitality in the vines. It's a long-term process, but the soil is definitely improved. And overall, you've got a good, clear conscience and kind of heartfelt that you are doing the right thing on the land. We're not, using those artificial pesticides and fertilizers and so on. Again, that's sort of down the rabbit hole thing. One of the things between good organic viticulture and then biodynamics. Good organic viticulture sets the kind of the level, the precedent for doing things, I think, correctly to the land, trying to grow good, healthy fruit, create good, healthy vines, and create a brilliant environment in the soil. Okay, biodynamics and what we do with biodynamics is, as you know, a very big topic actually about. I don't think we've got enough time here to even go on that, but the applications we make to the soil and the vines using the preparations with biodynamic kind of hopefully take it from organic a little bit higher, a little bit further, trying to kind of really help the vines show to their true potential. But then to do that with biodynamics, you've got to be a very good attentive steward. So a good grape grower, a very attentive grape grower, farmer, and winemaker, of course. A lot of visual and a lot of touching and a lot of seeing. You're looking at colours, you're looking at shapes of vines, you're looking at the soil again in big time, and whether you keep with a compacted soil or whether you open the soil up. Compacted soil can kind of, to a degree of compaction and not opening up, that non-disturbance can be a benefit, but then if you don't disturb it, you'll not be able to get other things into the soil to help improve. So, there's I think a lot more decision making you've got to do, a lot more, let's say, visual, touching, walking, seeing. I think compared to conventional agriculture, you're not, with conventional agriculture, by that we mean, unfortunately, but kind of pesticides, man-made chemicals and so on. You can pretty much do that, and on the whole, every year, good healthy crop, etc. But with biodynamics and organics, you haven't got the toolkit that you might have with conventional, and therefore that can lead to certain problems. So, for example, like powdery mildew is a problem, and have we got some things we can use on powdery mildew? Yes, we have, but it's more about like catching it early and being aware that what it might be coming. Things like phylloxera at Montinore, we have phylloxera in the soil because most of our vines are own rooted. So again, it's not panicking that we've got some phylloxera. It's about what's our reaction to it? How do we deal with it? How do we make a long-term plan? So it's a lot of thinking before the doing, whereas with conventional, I think you just do. But the end result is for vitality, health, and just great fruit to work with great flavors. That's what we're trying to achieve.
Stephen, you might think I'm crazy, but I'll share a philosophy I have with you, and you might think I'm nuts. And I have some people tell me that they don't necessarily agree with me, but I wholeheartedly believe the whole aspect of terroir. I know that everything is mixed up in there, aspect and soil type and everything. But I think the environment underground around the roots, I think, is truly the key to expressing terroir in a grape. I think that it has to do with soil health, the type of microbes that are around those roots, and they allow different types of uptake at different levels, different times, depending on what type of soil microbes you have, which are very different all over the world. Those that spray and use a lot of pesticides and use that, I almost feel that it robs a vine of its ability to express terroir in an area, because you've damaged or killed those soil microbes, and it no longer has that sense of place that it has. That's a personal belief of mine. I could be way off, but from tasting different wines in different regions all over the world, I wholeheartedly believe that. I believe that biodynamic and organic wines express terroir so much more evidently than ones that are heavy pesticided. Just my opinion.
I haven't got it to share with you, but I agree with you totally, Dennis. I mean, there's a great drawing schematic kind of thing of like, it's a kind of like the iceberg analogy where, actually the reverse iceberg in a way that, everyone sort of looks at an iceberg and goes, wow, but there's always mass below the ground. And similar sort of in the vine, people go, oh, look, those vines are nice. And they're just looking at all this and the growth and everything they can see. But the real grain and everything going on is down below the soil. So it's kind of like the picture I'm describing is kind of like, it's like an inverted vine with actually all the grain and the growth actually above, even though it's actually below ground, so to speak. But you're right with the microbes and the development of like mycorrhizal fungi below ground, and the symbiotic relationship that all those do with the roots system, and encouraging an exchanging of the nutrients in the soil and the watering of the soil into the root system to then be able to deliver the vitality and all the nutrients up to the living part of the plant. If you kill off that with, as you say, more conventional agriculture, or certainly sub it down, like it's not available to kind of work so well, then yes, you can still grow fruit, but I don't think you're going to get the character of the fruit and the flavors going on in the fruit, or maybe even the flavors that can then express themselves come winemaking time. You're not going to get that. So you still get some nice wine, I think very nice fruit, nice wine, but it may not be as special, unique, and certainly not off place. I'm coming back to sort of vineyard site. That place is really important, and particularly ever more so in Oregon.
Well said. I agree. And now I just want to go down the rabbit hole for those out there who really do like to geek out, because this is an important element of grape growing. And you touched on this a little bit. We don't have to go super down the rabbit hole, but talk about your vine training and your canopy management and why you choose that particular style of canopy management.
Yeah, so we use what we call VSP, or vertical shoot positioning. We cane prune and then VSP. So that kind of creates a lot of. We're trying to keep the canopy generally open for a lot of light, sunlight, ventilation. It's important. Again, drawing back to the powdery aspect of powdery mildew, we can have impact of it certain times a year. So we want a nice open canopy, decent internode length, etc. So vertical shoot positioning, and we've also developed, which I believe actually probably came from Alsace originally, but like an arced sort of cane system. So instead of just this kind of thing, but it's more arching and training the canes to kind of allow a good flow of nutrients along the canes, so that all parts of the cane and the buds are getting good equal supply of nutrient. And efficiency to kind of do their job. So that's something else we've tried, mostly on a Pinot Gris with good success. So those are the kind of two training systems we use. I would say historically in Oregon, Oregon's probably tried every training system under the sun, right? For various things. For example, even at Montinore, when I came, we used to have what we call like a modified lyre system and a double cordon system. We actually used to do cordon trained spur pruned as well. That worked for volume, but didn't work for generally health of the vines, I'd say, because the cordons can start to develop overwinter microbes and stuff, that unwanted mites and stuff. So that didn't work so well. But Oregon's really tried everything, and that's broadly one of the things that I just love about Oregon. That from when the first the pioneers, as we call them, came to Oregon in the early 70s, they've been through thick and thin and tried so many different things to try and get the best out of trellising and of training the vines. And to try and get the best fruit from there, and through thick and thin. Some things have worked really well, and some things have worked horribly. And obviously clonal selection as well has not always gone well in there. So, but trellis. I'd say most people in Oregon kind of probably do like a cane prune system, VSP.
Okay, great. And you touched on something that we'll talk about later. But one of the things that I think continues to give Oregon and its growers and its winemakers their strength is that they found something that worked, right? Pinot Noir, mostly. That's sort of your number one when people think of Willamette Valley. But most winemakers and growers didn't stop there. They're continuing to experiment and push those limits and find new things. Like the Argentina Malbec, one trick pony. Some producers in Argentina are still trying to push the edge of that. And I think that's refreshing, because the the minute that we become complacent in the wine industry, then we become a monoculture of wine. And boy, wouldn't that be boring, wouldn't it? Well, a good transition going from the dirt into some winemaking is I asked you some questions about mechanical versus hand harvesting and how that translates to how you approach those grapes and how they come into the winery. There are some people that probably understand that completely, but for the layperson, I think they think, okay, well, someone just goes and snips the grapes off and they take them to the winery. So can you talk about the hand harvesting versus the mechanical harvesting and how that impacts you as a winemaker approaching making that wine?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a fan of both methods actually for different reasons. So at Montinore, we have a mechanical harvester. We've actually been utilizing one since 2001. We were kind of one of the very early folks to kind of take on a mechanical harvester. Right now, we've got a top of the line Pelink harvester, which we purchased the latest version in 2017 or late 2016 actually. But and so a lot of our fruit from the estate vineyard comes in machine harvested. We've got other sites where we draw fruit from, which we own, vineyard sites we own, where it's not suited to mechanical harvesting, mostly from the slope. There's actually plenty of sites in Oregon that wouldn't do well with mechanical harvesting just for that reason alone, because of the degree of aspect or slope. Not safe. So, but when we have the machine harvested fruit come in, the Pelink harvester, the early ones, machine harvesters, yeah, it's been a journey, I think, with them in terms of a lot of people think they kind of beat up the fruit and beat up the trellising. Sometimes, yeah, it's a bit of a battle with the trellising sometimes and the post work, but in terms of the actual quality of the fruit that machine harvesters give is excellent now. It's basically they shape the berries from the racus into what you call or conveyors and gondolas. It's actually very gentle, and the shaping of the vine is not like right on the fruit kind of thing. It's kind of just pre and the fruit started dropping off. So when we get the fruit in, two good advantages with mechanical harvesting. We start early in the morning when normally the mornings are cool in late September, October. So we get cool fruit, we get fruit very quickly, and mostly we get very whole berry, obviously some juice, but whole berries, very undamaged. And it's amazing, it's great fruit to work with, get it in quickly, and we can deal with it quickly. When it comes to hand picking, yeah, sure, there are great advantages with hand picking. A lot of it is kind of, you can sort sometimes it's a little tricky at speed, but you can sort on the vine. You know, there's, excuse me, there's some things, if there's some compromised fruit on the vine, you know, as a hand picker, a good hand picker would go, don't take that, you know, leave that on there. So a machine harvester can't do that, unfortunately, very well anyway. So that's one of the great advantages of hand picking. The disadvantage is it's very slow. And what we often still do with hand picking, there might have been some visual inspection on the vine and in the vineyards, we will still sort that fruit for quality, which is extremely common in Oregon. And that's why we have very high quality wines in Oregon that just about everyone on their hand-picked fruit does sort, even if they've had good hand-pickers to start with. So when we get the fruit in the winery, we've got two things, you know, we've got machine-picked fruit that we quickly handle, whether it be a white or Pinot, where it can be tipped directly into an open-top fermenter. When it comes to the destemming of the fruit, or maybe not destemming, if you're going to do whole cluster, and that's also quite common in Oregon. So some of the fruit we don't destem, and we'll just do what you call whole cluster ferments. Montinore normally does maybe between 15 and 30, 35 maximum. There's plenty of other winemakers in the valley who do more. Maybe even heard of like 100% whole cluster fermentations as well, which must be interesting. I've never done those personally, but yeah, with the destemming as well, the quality of the equipment you have is slow, but the quality of the equipment you have is paramount. So again, at Montinore, we have a very high grade or high end Pelink. It's actually a Pelink destemmer again. It's a French company that makes extremely highly regarded viticultural equipment. So we can destem our hand-picked fruits, so sort it first, destem it, and then work with the fruit. It's been gently worked with. So we can. The resulting end in the fermentations is great quality fruit that's not going to be battered around or messed around too much. So
I would think, and just touching on the whole 100% whole cluster, I would think two things. Just a side question: you'd have to make sure that you had good lignification, like good, ripe stems. Number one, and number two, would that be an issue with your pH during fermentation? Because I mean, you have high potassium, right, in your stems. So isn't that going to throw your pH off a little bit with 100%?
I think it surely would, yes. I mean, adjusting, I mean, to me, that's a great question, actually, a touch on pH, Dennis, because, I mean, pH for me is kind of, 80% of winemaking, really. Working with a good pH and what that means to the health of the wines is incredibly important. And one of the questions actually you asked me prior to the interview was about, making acid additions and adjusting pH. So you're absolutely right. With more whole cluster, and more skin contact there, you're going to generate probably a higher pH. A higher pH in winemaking is not, it's not a disaster zone, so to speak, as long as you're within a certain range. But I think kind of more post-fermentation, it can create issues if you've got slow malolactic fermentation. So, trying to get the pH in a reasonable range and what might gear that up at times of fermentation or harvest is kind of an important thing to think about. Just going back to the whole cluster, or the 100% whole cluster idea. I've actually done that once, but with Gamay, where we did like a carbonic maceration. I'm trying to think the right word, but
it is carbonic maceration. Yeah.
Yeah, so I did that once with Gamay, where basically we fill one tank with 100% whole cluster, and it does work. The weight of the fruit starts, the berries start to open up, and the juice starts to express itself, and you get kind of mini fermentation going on. So it's interesting. I think I need to try it, actually, to be honest, because next time we talk, I can talk more authoritatively about it.
So. That's very interesting. I find that very interesting. Yeah, that's neat. So, and I think that's part of the element that people don't understand with the whole berry versus whole cluster and what that importance. I think you did a good job of explaining all that in a way that I think even people who aren't wine geeks would understand. So I think you did a really good job with that. So one of the things that you are passionate about and attracted me to your profile was your passion and love for white varieties. Somewhere along the way, and I don't know if this is a domestic shortcoming, being in the United States or what, but for some reason, people don't equate white wines with being as high quality as some of the red wines. Like if you paid $100 for a California Cab, people are like, oh, okay, well, yeah, it's a low allocation, or this. They make excuses for it. But if you charge someone $50 for a amazing Gewürztraminer, they go, oh, $50 for a white wine. I don't know where that came in, but what was it, Alsace, or what drew you to the attraction with these aromatic whites and the amazing things that they can do?
Yeah, I mean, it was Alsace actually that kind of really first seeded that love of the aromatic whites. And I worked at a winery called Domaine Sitmac in Alsace. It's in the small village of Huneville, just sort of between Ribeauvillé and it's Ribeauvillé and Ribe. And it's an amazing, I mean, everything Alsace and obviously a lot of Europe is just beautiful, amazing. So one of the things that drew me there, predominantly white wine production, they do make Pinot Noir there as well. But the white wines, and it's the history of the vineyards there and the quality of the fruit, and it's just the flavors and the intensity of what was coming out from the Alsatian fruit was just beautiful. It's just amazing to work in a winery that's been doing, I think they've been working for 130 years at the time. And it's that they know the vineyard so well, they know the fruit so well, and the expressions of the fruit is just incredible. It's more than I've ever had from any Montinore fruit, white fruit over here. It's just really just so much in your face and just beautiful to work with. So that kind of first seeded my love of it. But when I got into more into the responsibility of winemaking, white winemaking is very technical. You can argue that anyone can throw some red fruit in a fermenter and stomp it around a bit and eventually come out with some red wine that's got some alcohol and some body and tastes pretty good. But I think with white wine, you haven't got so much kind of elbow room. You've got to be a lot more refined. Your decision making has got to be a lot more precise. I think you've got to have a good endpoint idea of where you want the chemistry to be with the wine, and how you want that to go into longevity with those wines. The aging processes, and some Gewürztraminers and Rieslings, of course, age amazingly beautifully. So I think that technical aspect for me was very appealing. So hopefully I'm not too anal, but I do like a certain amount of analogy there kind of being very precise with things. And with the white fermentation, there's a longer, slightly longer, slower fermentations. Once you've got the juice process, you don't have to be, completely babysitting them. It's not quite the speed of which, let's say, a Pinot Noir or any other red wine fermentation might go. But when you make decisions, you've got to be, I say, make them at the right times, make them for a reason, be precise in if you're going to add something and why you're going to add it. Keep an eye on them very carefully after fermentation, because often sitting on the lees can, if you've got good clean lees, you can leave white wines there for some considerable time, particularly, for example, with clean lee Chardonnay. But otherwise, other times the lees can kind of turn a bit. You can't just leave it for a couple of weeks to go away. You've got to be there to make that action and that decision. So I think because of all that love, that's my kind of love of the white wine field and the making of it. Regarding the pricing, I think somewhat the pricing is the mechanics of, with red wines. There's definitely more labour. There's more with the cooperage program. There's definitely more money that goes probably into it. It's more handwork for sure. So maybe that's obviously part of the reason why the price is higher. But there's, I don't necessarily always see a reason why that white wine shouldn't be so highly regarded at the price. Because I think maybe it's because of people, or bigger commercial white wines, arguably not such great quality, can be very actually quick to make, big stainless steel fermentation tanks, etc. Quick turnaround, not so much attention to detail necessarily, but then the quality isn't so good, so therefore the price is lower. And maybe in North America, we're still on that kind of lean with white wines that, that's why they're cheaper and they're not so exciting or expressive.
Yeah, I didn't think about it. That's a very good point that you bring up there. And let me tell you, and this is not, I think you make very good white wines from the ones that I've tasted, but my soul as far as white wines belongs to Alsace. I just think that they make some of the sexiest white wines on the planet. And those people who question whether white can age will kick it over to one of the favorites of mine. And I'm sure you've had a Sauvignon that had some age on it. And those people who don't believe that a white wine can't become something amazing, if you have a Sauvignon that's 20 to 25 years old, it'll change your life. I mean, it'll change your belief in white wine. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've actually, I think it's another thing that people don't really quite appreciate is that how white wines can age beautifully. So, I mean, internally here, people are tired of me telling this story, but I can tell this story to you and your viewers. But I made it's actually my first year here as a white winemaker at the time in 2009, and the head winemaker had left earlier in the year, and myself and a colleague kind of started splitting the winemaking duties, and it was a big vintage in 09. It was actually a warm vintage, and we had this fruit coming at us from all angles. And I had to make a reserve Gewürztraminer, and the Gewürz fruit, again, warmer year, was a lovely, lovely fruit. But I was so short of time, and to be honest, still kind of learning knowledge-wise, so I had a lot on my plate, tanks were full, and I produced 4 barrels, 455-gallon stainless steel drums of Gewürz. And I really didn't have much time to look at it or nurture over it or pour over it. And, got some yeast in there and it fermented, etc. I've had a bottle of that wine this year, 09, 21. It's still drinking beautifully. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily think that that's only 12 years on. So we'll see how that wine develops. But, the core of the wine is still there. The flavor, the fruit's faded a bit, yeah, granted, but it's still got the length and the legs to deliver something that's really great in the glass and underappreciated, really. And I think that's true with a lot of aromatic varietals, really. The Rieslings, Gewürzes, even the much maligned Müller-Thurgau, and Montinore does have Müller-Thurgau on site, that, I just don't think people want to take them seriously enough, and they certainly don't think that white wine needs to be drunk quickly. Well, it's pretty, still nice to drink early, but not, you can get some amazing experiences, as you said earlier, about with wines that have been properly aged, white wines.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And before we talk about, because I do want to talk a little bit about the geeky terpene element. So, that I know that kind of pushed you to, wow, what the heck is he asking me about here with terpenes? But I had the opportunity, you guys sent me, or your PR person sent me, the Vivace, the sparkling that you do.
Yeah.
Yes, that has Gewürz in it. And I was absolutely blown away for a couple reasons. I always think to myself, and this is the old WSET kind of coming back on you going, would I have even come close to getting the grapes in this in a blind tasting.
Uh-huh.
Just by looking at that wine, it had a goldenness that suggested that maybe it was Pinot Noir based. Initially, just looking at the color, because it was golden as opposed to straw colored. But instantly, when you put your nose in it, you go, oh my gosh, it's so aromatic. And the flavors, it has that classic perfumed Gewürztraminer element that comes out in there. And I found that incredibly interesting. Now, I'm assuming, because it was so fruit forward, and I saw that you do produce a traditional method sparkling, but I'm assuming that that particular wine was probably Charmat. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, well, actually not quite. To be honest, so it's actually what we call. It's a bit hard with the Vivace because you don't really want to, in terms of getting the carbonation in there into the wine. There's a number of, obviously, as you well know, Dennis, there's a number of ways that you can get carbonation in. So this wine is actually what we call like forced carbonated, but so it's not done. So it is forced carbonated, but not in the tank method. It's actually done on the kind of way to the bottling line. So the wines there, it's made, it's all very pretty, and then we inject effectively the CO2 into that, which is the same method essentially if you're doing it Chardonnay or in tank there. So, but the wine still delivers very, really beautifully, and it's really because of those core four white grape varieties, the Gewürz and the Müller and the Riesling, and the little bit of Muscat sometimes in there as well. So that's why the wine presents so prettily, I think.
I found it very fun and very interesting to drink. I just found it was a very just easy, drinkable, fun, sparkling wine. Yeah, it was very, very nice.
It is, yeah, and it's also certified organic and biodynamic as well. For those that are interested, that's also an extra plus point. Just very briefly coming back to the methods of creating carbonation, and thank you for touching on the fact we make a method Noir as well. I'm very proud to say actually that we hadn't made a method Noir in almost 30 years up until 2017. And then I was charged with making one of those wines. So we just actually made 2 more out of 21. The 2017 we finished fully just a few months before harvest this year, and it's amazing, beautiful. I'm so proud of that wine. And if you can find it, we haven't got much of it. We've only got like about 350 cases, but it's a great wine to try, and it's obviously different to the Vivace. It's made in Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but lovely wine, and I encourage you to try both of them because they both got massive merit, and both example different ways of creating carbonation, which
I'm a huge sparkling wine fan, and my wife's a very much a sparkling wine fan. So we certainly will, absolutely.
I think I need to get you some of that over there, Dennis. I think I need to get you some of that over there.
Well, as a plug, also that's something that and I did look at your website. That's something that people can order if it's still available. So hurry up and get it. If it's still available, they'll be able to pick that up and have it shipped to them.
Yeah.
So just I guess one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, and you touched on this earlier, about what is the most difficult wine that you make, the wine that wakes you up at night, that you just roll your eyes over, that sometimes you just want to pull your hair out. And I'm going to let you answer that. I know what you wrote, and I read it through 3 or 4 times, but I want you to answer that for everybody.
Yeah, well, I think I think the waking up in the middle of the night, well, that's a sore point with me, because unfortunately I've got horrible sleep patterns. I do wake up in the middle of the night, often worrying about work, because the last thing you really want to worry about. But I think at harvest time you worry about everything, whilst it's in varying stages of fermentation or coming out of fermentation. But overall, it's still, yeah. I mean, there's times I worry about certain wines and where they're going, or whether if things I maybe want to tweak or in the timeline. But overall, it's got to be Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley. I think any winemaker would probably say that. And the reason is because we make Pinot Noir in Oregon on, I call it like a world stage. It's up there with Burgundy, and it's up there with New Zealand and so on. And there's not much room for error. There's certain times where it's a bit of bandwidth, and you've got time to like readjust the tiller there and try and get things back on track. But you can't make too many mistakes. And but going back beyond that, you've got to have great quality fruit, and therefore you've got great quality grape growing. So, and you've got a great quality soil, and so on and so forth. So it starts from the very beginning, and you have little wobbles along the way, but you can't lose too much of anything to get to the finishing point. And so for that reason, I think that gives me the greatest overall worry, or concern, but then there's other things, some of a more imminent or immediate nature that kind of I do lose sleep over. Yeah. So yeah. I've lost plenty of sleep being Montinore's winemaker over the years, I can tell you. But the passion, I think it's important to actually say this, for those who don't know much about winemaking, what it means, that, and I've said this to my bosses and my colleagues, that, the passion I have, every day I walk in the winery, I love it. It's like a zest, and it's like, I want to be there, and I want to check on stuff, and I want to make sure that things are going okay. And it's, even on weekends or whatever, or late at nights, I still have that, and I haven't lost that. So even with the politics of wine or business of wine, sometimes that can be frustrating or create tensions, but I still love walking that winery and wanting to make really good wine. And I'm sure any winemaker would say the same thing generally. Or if they don't, then maybe they don't want to be there.
I equate, and this might be an oversimplification, but just to further what you said, because I 100% think that comes through in the wine. When you have someone who loves baking, I'm paying homage to my grandmother. People would ask her, she'd give a recipe out, and they'd make it, say, well, it doesn't turn out the same way as yours. And she would always say, well, I make mine with love. And I think the same thing with bakers or cooks or winemakers. If you're passionate about not only the end product, but the process, and you have care, and you put part of your heart and soul in that, it shows through in the finished product in a way that you can't fully describe. And I like I said, I don't think anybody ever baked cookies like grandma, but it's sort of the same type of thing, I think.
It is, Dennis, absolutely. And I think also, at the end of the day, it does go hand in hand with attention to detail. And attention to details, I think, in any high-end profession, whatever you're doing, are the key. And I think to the endpoint consumer, they're often the things you're never going to see, all those tiny little things that, say, in my trade, like a winemaker would have done along the way. And it's so part of it is that passion, that heartfelt love, that desire, that want to achieve and to keep on tweaking and make things a little better every year. So part of it's that, but I'd say a lot of it is this behind the scenes attention to detail, and that just tweaking that temperature on that tank, or that just topping off that tank because it's just got that extra 100 gallons of ullage, and making sure that doesn't sit there for too long. And and coming on the weekend, because that does actually need to be moved, that wine on the weekend, and not used the following week. So things like that, really, it's all that kind of combined. But at the end of the day, really, so if you're not passionate, you haven't got that extra love, if you're not happy, in what you're doing, whether it's the grape growing or the winemaking, then I think it's going to show. It might only be subtle, but it's still going to show.
Absolutely. So out of everything that you talked about today, the winemaking, the grape growing, all those kind of things, if you had to just use a few sentences to describe, if I ask you, and this is very difficult, I know, what makes great wine?
Oh, that's always a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah. What makes great wine? It's always got to start. It has got to be the fruit, and the growing of the fruit and that nurturing of the fruit. Because if you don't have the core quality in the fruit and the typicity in the varietal, then I don't think even the best of winemakers can't turn that into amazing wine. So I think that's the core of it. I think being true to style as well, being honest in what you're doing. So keeping, if you want to make great Gewürz, for example, great Pinot Gris or great Pinot Noir, not tweaking, not being too much of the manipulator, trying to keep honest. I think, I'll be truthful. We do that here at Montinore, I think, pretty well. Yes, we make decisions. Yes, sometimes we add things, whatever. But we don't want to do too much. We don't really want to be a steward or a shepherd of that fruit to nurture that into hopefully great wine. Once you've got that hopefully great wine in bottle, of course, there's another whole sub end of that, which is that laying down, that aging process, and when do you consume that wine, and that leads into the commercial pressures on winemakers. There's what most winemakers will say, well, actually, I don't want to release that wine now. But the owners of the company say, no, you've got to release that wine. That's what we need out in the market. And that can be frustrating sometimes. And maybe that wine won't express itself in the way that both the grape grower and the winemaker wanted it to be expressed. So, that's, I think, a never-ending battle between, those artists, if you like, in the winery and the vineyard and the people who pay the wages at the end of the day and make the business end of the wine happen. So, but when you do get a great wine, I mean, what a pleasure it is, from anywhere in the world. And when it might be a moment, it doesn't even have to be, to me, great wine doesn't have to always be even about the purity or the amazement of the wine, but it's also about the place and who you're with and the moment. It might just be a fleeting moment that you have that wine, but that can last you a lifetime in your memory. And to me, that's part of it. It's not just about the liquid in the bottle.
Well said, and I believe that's what life's about is the creation, the memory of those special moments. They kind of string together to create your memory, and that's absolutely wonderful. And you're very true to. It's almost like I planned it, but one of the things that you said in your philosophy, I asked you what your winemaking philosophy was, and it was perfect from what you just said, because you said to make the best wines possible from the quality fruit provided for me, whilst honoring the code of organic and biodynamic grape growing and winemaking. And you touched on that and expanded laterally from that, but that absolutely goes with what you just said. We talked about a little bit about where the wine industry is going, and you talk about bravely expanding and opening new regions and experimenting with new varieties. We kind of touched on that. And you also, what you just said, is about being honest and transparent with, with the consumer. But I think it's also, and you probably meant this, but it's also about being honest with yourself. As a winemaker, like you said, being true to that varietal and being true that, Oregon is going to make great Pinot Gris. Is it going to be the same as Alsatian Pinot Gris? No, and it shouldn't be. They should have their own identity of what Willamette Pinot Gris is, and I think to compare the two is sort of is misappropriated, because Pinot Gris from that there isn't better or worse. It's just different because it has an identity to itself. So, and you touched on that with that statement, and I thought that was very, very interesting.
Well, I've done this as well, like with that sort of statement about the honesty, because I did answer, one of the questions in that form, that, one of my, it's not a concern, it's just an involvement really. When I first came to Oregon in 1997, and I touched on earlier about the pioneers, the Oregon pioneers, we talked like people like Dick Erath and David Lett and Myron Redford, and I worked for Myron Redford at Amity Vineyards. That's amazing guy, amazing character. And when I came in 97, though, there was this true kind of gritty honesty, great collaboration, which is actually still good in the Oregon wine industry. But, there was an honesty in the wines that you go around the tasting rooms and not every wine would be a hit, but that the grape grower and the winemaker would have put all their efforts and their, it'd be like, this is what it is from my site, from this year with this vintage variation. And so there's definitely variation. It was, you can work amongst the weeds a little bit, but you find some amazing wines. Now, I think in more modern day Oregon, in the last 25 years, understandably, but things have shifted in the evolvement from that kind of arguably more, small, kind of more, it's like the honest, but kind of more sort of folksy environment, rustic, has definitely changed because, again, bigger stage. We've got, for example, a good quality cut at all levels now, so you don't find so much, the variation. But it's a shame in some regards, because I love that, just that heartfelt kind of honesty about this is what I'm producing, this is what I'm trying, and everyone tried so hard. I think that's a great thing that people need to know in Oregon historically, is that there was so much effort and hours put into just trying to make this thing work. And now we've got this thing to work, and it works really well. But because winemakers in change and the playing field has changed as well, it's like, now everyone can kind of make great wines. We've got much better equipment. We've got much better additives. We can add in a much greater selection, if you like. There's plenty of expertise around. So it's certainly not easy, but it's kind of maybe not quite as romantic for me. There's a little bit of romance which has died from, say, 25 to 30 years ago or beyond that, which I wasn't here beyond that time. But It's a different field at the moment. But within that, and I say I tout Oregon a lot because I live and work here. But I do think that Oregon still does that really well, and I do think actually the collaboration and how we try and help each other is brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I think you touched on a very real issue that I think a lot of other winemakers would 100% agree with that. I'm really glad that you took us down that road. I found that very interesting. Okay, so we know making wine is not the romantic, passionate thing it's cracked up to be all the time, right? Hard work, getting your hands dirty, getting up early, like you said, waking up at night sometimes worrying about things. And I asked you this, and I love this part. What do you do when you don't make wine? When you have those days off, what do you like to do?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, because travel has always been part of my life. Obviously, well stunted at the moment with COVID, of course, unfortunately. But because travel has been part of my life, I find it hard to really disconnect from my job and my career. And distance helps me disconnect. So to me, traveling is a massive part of that. Unfortunately for me, I need to travel a distance, and the distance for me isn't going 50 miles to the coast, although that's somewhat helpful. But to me, it's getting on a plane and going 5,000 miles back to the UK or to Europe. And I'd love to get back to Australia and New Zealand one day. So, and at that point, I'm so geographically far away that I can start to get my brain start to do other things, and enjoy other aspects of life. So the other things that help that though are for me, family, animals, beer.
Well, I find it interesting. You said you have a dog, 4 cats, a hedgehog, and a hamster. Goodness gracious.
That's right. Yeah, we keep on talking about adding to the. My wife's actually a senior veterinary technician.
Okay.
So she works at a large animal clinic as well. So sometimes I have pigs walking and llamas and this kind of thing. I don't quite think we're ready for the pigs and llamas at home, but you never know what she's going to bring home from work potentially. So, but also like sports as well, watching sports. So anything where I can kind of just stop for a minute and get out of the wine, wine out of my head, But I mean, said that, Dennis, wine, I have a glass of wine most nights, and therefore it's kind of always with me,
Well, that's one of the things I asked you. You said you had 2 wines open. You had the Matzinger Davies Gorgeous Savvy, a Sauvignon Blanc, and then you had the Montinore Reserve Pinot. So I have a question. This weekend, is there anything special that you're opening?
Well, I just want to say actually today, because when you're asking the questions, that's truly what I had open. Today, actually, I've got just to share with everyone. I've got our 2018 Montinore Pinot Gris, which is right here, and I've also got a very nice, beautifully drinking 2017 Reserve Pinot Noir.
Nice.
So I'm enjoying both of those wines at the moment. So coming into the weekend, Dennis, I'm not too sure actually. I'm not sure what I'll go for. I've got it's kind of comical. I mean, everyone would love a beautiful wine cellar. I'm lucky at my house in some regards to have a crawl space that I can almost stand up in. But the good thing is it's cool year round. So I stuff as much wine down there as I possibly can. So often the weekend is kind of with my wife and my children, what's for dinner, right? And I will go down to the crawl space and stoop a little bit and kind of pick through a few boxes and decide what the given wine is going to be for dinner that night. So that's probably what's going to be this weekend.
I won't ask you how many times you've hit your head in that crawl space. I'm sure.
Yeah, there's copper pipes and there's the rafters, and so it's tricky. But I'd rather have a cool, some degree of temperate space year round, rather than not have that. So right.
Absolutely.
But I haven't quite got that. But it's
absolutely. Now being British, you said you were a fish and chips lover. Now I wouldn't have assumed that because that would be profiling, but you said you're a fish and chips lover, as am I. So question, what are you drinking with your fish and chips?
Often it's a white wine, actually, but it could be any white wine. I'm Montinore centric, as in I've got most of the wine in my cellar is Montinore, of course. So I'd say Pinot Gris, actually. Pinot Gris and fish and chips. It sounds yeah, I'm almost embarrassed to say it in a way because it's you should be drinking anything other than beer with fish and chips. I don't know, but often a glass of Pinot Gris with fish and chips.
Do you think if across the pond a million Brits just sighed whenever you said a Pinot Gris with fish and chips? No, I could see that working though. The nice bright acid absolutely would stand up to that. So no, I could absolutely see that.
Yeah, I think a lot of Brits would say, to be honest. I think I was going to say about fish and chips. Yeah, it's like we're actually at my home. I mean, at least I'm trying to sort of make up some ground with the Brits now. You know, if we're not having a beer with fish and chips, but I actually do my own like chips, and either do the double cook method or the double fry or the triple fry method, so to get that real kind of soft on the inside but crisp on the outside. When we've got more time, we do that with our own and make our own batter and battering our own fish.
Fantastic.
Well. So,
now, do you roll it in newspaper as well before you serve it?
No. I mean, newspapers are coming up in the past, as you know. So, but I mean, when I was let's say growing up as a kid, but even into moderate adulthood, fish and chip shops in the UK, you do go and they do roll them up in the fish in the newspaper there. It's great and it's economical, and it decomposes afterwards. It's not it's a good way to kind of serve them up. So
I love it. Well, I'll tell you, when I was in college, I was in a class and I was over there for a month.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed, we based in London, very close to Marble Arch off the Red Line of the Tube. And then we went to Stratford, Canterbury, Bath, Dover, anytime we could get away, we'd get away and just, yeah, it was very, I mean, everyone was extremely friendly. We had a great time, a lot of history. I spent a few days of my life in the National Museum and the V&A, which I thought were both just brilliant. So yeah, it was a very, very good experience for me. Yeah, I liked it a whole lot. I may have consumed a little bit too many pints during being there, but it was nonetheless it was quite good.
And where did you take your WSET? Do you do that like online or
I did my intermediate and advanced in Charleston, South Carolina, and then I did a online and then in Philly. So I was online and distance learning back and forth, and every 6 months for 2.5 years I flew to Philadelphia to sit for exams and stuff. So it was my wife was very patient and with all the time and effort and expenses and wine and such, but it was well worth it. It definitely, it's amazing because intermediate and advanced, you're like, wow, this is great, this is amazing. And then when I finished diploma, I felt like I knew less than I did when I finished advanced, because it broadens that view that you realize how much truly you don't know, and you'll never know all there is to know about the wine industry. So I just dedicated my life to being a terminal student in wine and viticulture, and I just read everything I possibly can.
That's great, Dennis. Yeah, and I think the diploma qualification for me, it's nice to hear you touch on that. But it's an awful lot of effort and time, but it is worth it. And I felt that when I did mine. I was like, I was having to travel down to London for it's like 60 miles each way at the time, and early mornings and stuff like that for the classes. And at the time, I was like, I think it's worth it. And it is worth it at the end of the day. And I've seen you on the alumni list now, because I'm actually really enjoying now the alumni newsletters that come through and that kind of thing. And kind of actually for me reconnecting the last couple of years back with other diploma graduates. So I'm so pleased I did that. It really kind of helped shape kind of the rest of my career in many regards. So.
I have a few I still stay in touch with. One got me involved in the American Wine Society, which I'm giving my input on. They're redoing their education. He lives in Missouri, and then another good friend of mine works for the agricultural department in the state of Kentucky, and I go out there every year to help judge the state wine competition in Kentucky, which we have a very good time doing that. A lot of wine, and then usually a night where we eat a good meal and drink some good bourbon. So it's kind of balances out quite nicely. But listen, Stephen, I know you're busy. I don't want to take up a bunch of your time, but this has been amazing. It obviously I was very excited by some of your responses, and I thought the answers to the questions were great, but it really was truly a pleasure speaking with you. And I do want to keep the lines of communication open, and I will, because next year the AWS meeting is in Washington State, and I'm flying out about 4 days early and plan on coming down and hitting a few places in Willamette. And I'll let you know if it works out with your schedule. I'd love to stop by, bring my wife by, and see some of the things you're doing there.
Well, when is the conference?
It would be end of October or beginning of November.
End of October. Okay, well, yeah, busy, but yeah, still. I mean, please, totally encourage you. I mean, likewise, James. I've loved the conversation today, and I've really appreciated your interviewing technique as well. You've been extremely relaxed, very knowledgeable, done your homework. You know, I just really love that, and it's because
I appreciate you saying that, Stephen. Thank you very much. I try to keep the interviews like this because I think one of the things is people just assume wine is so pretentious, and I think that's so wrong. Wine is fun, and somewhere along the way we've lost that. We need to gain that back. That people realize that it doesn't have to be a good British term. It doesn't have to be stodgy. It can be fun, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, that's where I think there's the mark between sort of the fun with wine, the fun with growing the grapes, etc. But then the pressure of the commercial side that we're all under these days is like to sell wine, and that's become kind of magnified, I think, in the last probably 10, 20 years. Well, again, I understand it, but I don't necessarily enjoy it so much.
This is sort of down the rabbit hole a little bit, and I know that when initially I sent you this question, I thought to myself, this is one he's going to look at and go, who is this guy? Why is he asking me about terpenes and white wine? But and I'll tell you, a lot of that stems from I have a passion for going and finding the aromatic molecules that are identified in different varietals, and then how they get into the final wine. I kind of like that process. My undergrad degree is in chemistry, so I have that geekiness to me a little bit. But I think especially when you mentioned aromatic whites and you mentioned Gewürz, and so I thought, oh man, terpenes. Obviously, he understands terpene chemistry and is doing some different things to do that. So when you answered it, and you answered it so well and so eloquently, and I thought, geez, that's something I really would like to touch on and tell people about that. So I'll transition and let you pick up the torch from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, terpenes are molecules which are basically responsible. They're found in many fruits, actually. I believe they're found in cannabis as well. But they're responsible for the kind of more floral and fragrant aromas that you get in wine, just being specific to wine here. So now these terpenes are often bound with sugar, or bound to a sugar molecule. So one of the tricks we have in wine is, how do you get these amazing characters with the terpenes to kind of come out and express themselves and come out to play, if you like, in the wine? So a couple of ways we can do that. Skin soaking is one of them, or immersing in skin. So Gewürztraminer, for many, many years, I've done 24 to 36 hour skin soak. We've got some benefits of Montinore. We've got a big tank press, we call a closed press, so we can put like plugs in the bottom and actually soak 5 tons of fruit in there for as long as you can have that in the press. You can obviously soak like in bins, picking bins. So this is either machine picked fruit or hand picked fruit or de-stemmed fruit that's soaking the bins there. Maybe just a modicum of sulfur put in just to help out any kind of bad microbes or anything. But you're trying to extract all those or some of the terpenes from the skins to be able to then allow them to express themselves in the fermentation. And the fermentation is when amazing times when all those hopefully start to come out. However, there's also, because they're bound to sugar often, and some of them stay bound to sugar, there's enzymes that can work to help extract or pull those away from the sugar molecules, but not until most of the sugar is gone. So often the enzymes that you can use, glycosidase enzymes, which will work to help open out those terpenes, but you can't do them until generally the wine's dry, or they work better when the wine's drier. Having said that, when you add an enzyme, enzymes get deactivated with bentonite. Bentonite, if you're doing refining, will deactivate those. So, there's a little window for kind of adding enzymes if you're going to use them. I found the skin soak actually works really well, and it really helps pull some of those out. And that's what I think, someone's overwhelming, but the beautifulness of all those flavors that you get in the aromatic varietals of Riesling, Gewürz, Muscat, and so on, Müller. But you have to work to get them out, but they're worth it. They're really worth it. And because then the resulting wine, that first swirl and sniff of a wine, that's what's going to invite you to that party. And when you do that, and you've pulled enough, hopefully enough out, that's going to allow people to say, hey, this smells beautiful, I'm going to enjoy this wine. So
absolutely, that is those aromatic whites are just unmistakable. You don't even really need to put your nose in the glass. You can walk by a glass and it just, wow, you can smell it right away. Just a quick question from a sort of a geeky scientific standpoint, with cold soak and with the enzyme that you use, are they temperature dependent? So do you have to warm that must up a little bit for terpene extraction, is it temperature dependent or is it irrelevant?
I think somewhat temperature dependent, yeah. But I mean, there's a couple of, with just to answer your question there, the soaking I do is at ambient temperature, not cold. So it's just whatever the temperature of the day is, in either outside on the crush pad in the press or in those covered picking totes that we've got stacked up in the winery, until we press out. So actually they're not too cold. And the enzyme I talked about, there's some enzymes you can add actually at maceration time, what we call maceration time, into the press, which helps start that process. And some that, as I mentioned, you add post, or can add post fermentation when the sugar is gone. But like any enzymes will still work at lower temperatures, but they don't work so well. So, really, if you're talking like 50 or below, well, yeah, they're going to work somewhat, but they're not really going to give you the best result. And if you get certainly too cold, they're not going to work at all. Or if anything else deactivates, like I said, bentonite. An optimal range for enzyme activity and to work for the best, I would say kind of maybe, 56, 55, 56 to maybe 61, 62, something like that. But I think that'll be the optimal. But they'll still work at 50, okay. But yeah, 45, not going to work so well. So I think temperature is important. But it's not the be all and end all necessarily.
So since we did extend past a little bit, just another quick question. We talked about the grapes and projects in the pipeline that you have at Montinore. I know there's probably some stuff you might not be able to talk about, so don't tell us any secrets or anything, but if you have some things that you're experimenting with from a growing standpoint, or doing some different things, with the wine, or making different styles.
Yeah, well, we've actually we've got a couple of other vineyard sites I mentioned. One of them is quite a newer acquisition, which is about 15 miles to the south of Montinore. And that's about 170 acre vineyard. We're planting in stages, and we're about halfway through planting that at the moment. We experimented, one new variety coming on for us anyway. New variety is Gamay. So we're going to plant a couple of acres of Gamay and see how that does. So I'm excited about that. There may be some other northern Italian varietals going in, but we've also got, with our Pinot Noir plantings, we've got a huge variety of clones, different clones going in there. It's kind of like a big experimental field, if you like, So there's going to be a lot of clones we haven't worked with before, and we'll see how those go once they come up to maturity. So, nothing overly exciting or overly kind of new. We're still going to have our core varieties here at Montinore, which are, again, the aromatic whites we talked about, and those northern Italian, Legrand and Terroir and so on, and some Muscat we've got here. But so nothing wild and wacky, but a couple of things are kind of interesting as we go forward. And our viticulturalist, as we carry on planting that new vineyard into 2022 and early 23, he may slip in. We're still kind of evaluating the land, and he may slip in another acre or two of this and that. So we'll see.
Great, fantastic. Well, Stephen, again, it has been an absolute pleasure. I hope you don't work too hard the rest of your day. But I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk with us, and again, to help bridge that gap between producer and consumer. I think that the more consumers can have an inside look at some of the things that winemakers do and what makes things special, and then go and buy some of your wine and taste it after watching the video, and then it will make more sense to them. So hopefully it will generate some sales for you as well, because I know there's always that constant pressure of having to sell the wine. But
yeah, I think for me, this is about, and to hopefully your viewers is, yes, please do go and try our wines, but try any wines, and particularly if today I've done nothing else and sow a little bit of a seed for Oregon wines, then I'm pleased, I'm happy, and if someone could say, oh, I'll go and try a bottle of Oregon Pinot and see what it's all about, or Pinot Gris from Oregon, then it doesn't have to be ours, but if it is, that's nice. But if it's not, but someone gets the zest for what we do out here and what folks are, the efforts and what folks are trying to do out here, then that's a win for me. So yes, try Oregon wine. It's great. I'll leave you with that parting shot there. So.
I like that. That's a good way to finish. Well, again, Stephen, thank you so much, and I will certainly reach out to you. And if it's available, if we can drop by, we'd love to, and we'll go from there.
Brilliant. Well, Dennis, it's been a pleasure. Honestly, I'll say your style of interviewing is lovely. Being very relaxed, and then that's what it's all about. So hopefully, my answers have been okay for you, and you can work with the material. And
the answers have been brilliant, and you're very honest and open, and thank you for tolerating some of my my geeky questions. So I very much appreciate it.
No, good questions actually, Dennis. I was so pleased when I saw your WSET diploma as well, because I think there's that kinship there as well. And so your questions were excellent. I said to you, I think when I wrote to you, that they're amazing.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And I hope you have a good day. And again, don't work too hard. Go spend some time with the animals.
Great. Well, thanks, Dennis.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Bottle Talk, and specifically the great conversation and insight that Stephen provided about his wines and his winemaking philosophy. If you want to read more about Montinore wines and see some of my personal tasting notes on these wines, then go to the Bottle Talk website. Link is below. There's also more to the story on the Montinore estate link, including the ability to purchase some of these amazing wines that we discussed today. So remember to follow the Bottle Talk and Montinore Estate on your favorite social media sites. Thanks for joining us.